It's a pleasure to be here today, and as I said, I've worked on aphids for 22 years, mostly developing resistance and studying some of their biology and ecology. And most of it was greenbug, but I've also worked on sugarcane aphid for quite a few years with African collaborators, as well as yellow sugarcane aphid and cornleaf aphid. Right, left. Okay. So the title I decided to call it not an apocalypse, some perspectives, and I guess I tend to be maybe the second generation after the greenbug workers from the 1960s and 70s, but I've heard all kinds of great stories about what work they've done. So going on, I'd like to say that aphids, basically it's known, they're the insects that are most capable of outbreak. During a week of time, they can increase 20-fold. They don't often do that, but occasionally they do. And they, as we know with the sugarcane aphid, they essentially took over and are causing disasters in some places. This is an old slide of greenbug. This is a greenbug balloon, and you can see what they thought about it in the 1968 and 70s time. A little bit of greenbug history. I'll give you some history on greenbug because there's a lot of interesting stories of that, and then kind of try to tie it into sugarcane aphid. Greenbug was first discussed in 1847 in Parma, Italy, and a pest of rice. And this is one of the quotes from that time. It was translated from the Italian. Rondani, Professor Rondani wrote this. And he said, "We have in this city an innumerable number of insects of a species of the Aphis genus of Linnaeus of the order Hemiptera. Sometimes and in certain places, these insects flying in clouds in the air have been so great as to render them troublesome to people, entering nose, eyes, and mouth, when one cannot think how to protect oneself." You can imagine the numbers of aphids this would involve. So we haven't seen this yet, right, with the sugarcane aphid. Going on, in 1882, greenbugs were described for the first time in oats in Virginia. And this is an interesting quote here. "Wheat looks well and promising, but a little green fellow is ruining oats and has already destroyed them entirely in many localities in Virginia." And this was written in the Country Gentleman magazine. In 1886 through 1890 was a troublesome period with the greenbug. They were pests on oats and wheat and rye. And you can see all the states that they essentially were infesting during this time period. Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Tennessee, Missouri, North Carolina, and Texas. So you can see kind of the pattern it's spread, similar to the sugarcane aphid is doing now. And the quote is that the oat crop in the vicinity of St. Louis, Missouri, and 100 miles in every direction is destroyed by an aphis, which is called the Texas louse. So I guess we should adopt that name, right? Or maybe we shouldn't. Those of us in Texas, probably not, right? And this is another time period that was it's kind of an interesting time, that in December 1906 in east central Texas, the aphids, greenbug aphids, were building up on volunteer oats in the area, and then they moved to wheat. And it was thought at that time that the reason they might have done this was because the temperature during the wintertime in December was 9 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than usual. And eventually, and we'll go on from here to other months, but eventually 70% of the wheat in Texas was abandoned because of this. And we had a similar outbreak like this on wheat in the Amarillo area about 8 to 10 years ago. And it was in December, and people were saying, well, it's a new biotype, a new change. But really, it was just a warm spell, and perhaps some wind brought them in. So it's not unusual, but it's kind of strange here. Anyway, going on just the next month there, in January 1907, the greenbug had actually moved north from Texas throughout the Great Plains state into Canada. And it also at that time moved east to the Carolinas, to the Atlantic Ocean, as well as west all the way to Colorado. So you're seeing patterns on great movements here. In March 1907, there's a quote that said, "The aphids are flying by the millions, the air is full of migrants, and farmers who are driving to town are covered on the windward side to their annoyance. Aphids, I guess you pronounce it, flew low, but the wind hurried them at such rapid rate that they might have been invisible higher in the air. The following day, large numbers of the aphids were on the wing, always moving north." And this one is interesting, but then it hit me, what were they driving to town in 1907? Probably their, I don't know, not their tractors, their buggies or something. So they were actually exposed to the aphids, hitting them, right? In 1949, essentially 100 years after greenbug was first described, on bluegrass in Manhattan, Kansas, there's this information. Essentially, this was the 2nd of June where they described these aphids, and so approximately 4 days before that, 4 to 3 days, there were 2 tornadoes near Manhattan, Kansas. There was heavy rain, and there was also flooding. And the greenbugs were so many of them there that they covered the store windows downtown and everything downtown. People downtown had green streaks on their white shirts when they tried to brush off the aphids. They were actually so thick that they were leaving stripes on their shirts. And actually the greenbugs caused an auto accident, or were blamed on causing an auto accident. And then after they'd been downtown, they actually went and settled on people's bluegrass lawns. And they think that the reason why they multiplied so much and took over the lawns was because DDT had previously killed the beneficials off, and the greenbug had established and taken over. And again, the entomologist in Kansas, he just about in May, the end of May, he searched all of Kansas to try to find greenbugs to record, monitor, just to see if they're there. He found nothing then. So they were actually claiming that probably the greenbugs had come from north central Texas from the wheat there and blew up north with the tornadoes and the windstorms. Some of us think, or you hear people say that the greenbug didn't find sorghum, didn't infest sorghum until the 1968 invasion. But actually, greenbug, there's an outbreak in 1916 on sorghum in the United States. Hayes recorded that in the Journal of Economic Entomology, issue 15. So a lot of us didn't realize this at the time, probably. But again, most of us know about the 1968 problems. And this is when the greenbug basically took up essentially permanent residence on sorghum. And they identified it as biotype C. And biotype C, from some work we've done with it, is actually a fairly it's a warm-tolerant aphid. It likes warm, hot conditions more than E and I and the others, especially the wheat A and B. During 1968, again, it's one of these invasions, one of these mass movements. From the Texas high plains, the greenbugs moved north to the Dakotas and also west all the way to California. In Hooker, Oklahoma, the farmers were so amazed with this mess that they actually claimed that the Russians were sending biological warfare in the shape of, I guess, the little green fellow, right? And this was, Dr. Thiel told me this story when he was growing up. This is what they claimed, and that was just after the Cold War, so you can see they might have, had a good reason to think that maybe. And in 1968, just in that year, $80 million in damage was done to sorghum in 1 year. And this is going on about July 1968 by Bruce Maunder. I don't know if most of you know him. He was a Dekalb breeder who helped develop a lot of the resistance during this time period. He said he went to a field day in Wall, Texas, And he looked at their good sorghum hybrids there, and they looked frosted. He said, despite the temperature being at the century mark then. So he looked closer, and he saw what remained of colonies of aphids on the underneath sides of the leaves. And then the next day he returned to Lubbock, and they looked in the sorghum nurseries at Lubbock, the Dekalb at Lubbock, and they found small colonies of aphids there. And so Dekalb actually got busy, and they alerted and advised their customers that they needed to use insecticide before this aphid was taken over and wiping them out. And Dekalb actually gave this advice because the extension at that time said that, you know, green bug doesn't do any damage to anything but wheat, basically. So Dekalb actually had an advantage. From Kansas, they obtained KS30 genes, resistant genes in SA7356, and they were able to quickly build them in and put them into resistant sorghum hybrids and get that out to the customers and help control the problem. This shows that you can see the green bug at that time, and David Kearns is playing with his phone. I don't know if he recognizes this or not. Do you? Yeah, see? Do you know this photo? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, Bruce provided this, and he said the area agronomist Clarence Kearns was checking sorghum, and he's looking in that time period with the aphids damage. Okay, let's go on here. And this shows you can see the dramatic difference between the susceptible on the left and the resistant sorghum on the right. Amazing difference there. And good work by everybody involved, including these two. Dr. Tietz was at Lubbock at that time at the experiment station. He was the sorghum entomologist there, and his good friend, the sorghum breeder Jerry Johnson, is on the right. And they did a lot of work developing resistant sorghum during that time period, and continued to be. And then we would often evaluate sorghum seedlings in flats in the greenhouse, and we plant all these up there. And then the small photo shows the green bugs all over resistant versus susceptible plants grown together. And there are actually lots of aphids on that green plant there, but it hasn't killed it. So that's where they claim its tolerance kind of mechanism of resistance. Okay, a few comments on the sugarcane aphid. I haven't spent too much time digging up information history, but this is one bit of information. Williams in 1931 wrote about the sugarcane aphid in Hawaii. And he said that migrating as winged females, the young are brought forth alive. They gather on the cane leaves in small groups. That when the temperature, the weather is favorable, usually warm and dry, and remember this is Hawaii, so it's still kind of humid, and there's an absence of enemies, that the aphids increase to cover the lower surface of the leaves. And years ago, this aphid was more abundant, probably because it did not have the introduced natural enemies there. And that's in Hawaii on sugarcane. And this is in Africa on sorghum. Van Rensburg, who's a fairly well-known sorghum entomologist in Africa, he said, although known as a sugarcane aphid in South Africa, it is not considered a pest of this crop, the sugarcane. It is a very serious pest of cultivated grain sorghums, especially in warmer regions. I just put some more pictures in. These are some of the entomologists with whom we've collaborated on sugarcane aphid research in, as you can see, South Africa, Honoline Duplessis. There, she works for the National Grain Council. And then Fernando Chatillo was one of my former master's students who went back to Mozambique and was in charge of 15 agricultural experiment stations in an incredibly agricultural country with few educated researchers. And unfortunately, he died just a couple years ago from pneumonia. Huge loss. And then David Munthali is from Botswana College of Agriculture. He's an amazing proponent of IPM, and he's doing research on sugarcane aphid there in cages, and he especially appreciates and records the natural enemies as well as the plant resistance. So I just wanted to give maybe some summary facts that I thought perhaps were factual about greenbug versus the sugarcane aphid. Again, described greenbug 1847 by Rondani in Italy, sugarcane aphid 1897 by Zointner from Java. The first time in the Americas, or what's recorded as being the first time, is 1882. Remember oats in Virginia? We talked about that. In 1896, the sugarcane aphid was recorded as damaging sugarcane in Hawaii. And in 1932, the sugarcane aphid was in Guyana. So perhaps that's how it got into Florida, being closer to Florida. Preferred crops, again, I put some of these on wheat and sorghum. The greenbug first wheat perhaps, and then sorghum. Sugarcane aphid is sometimes a toss-up whether it prefers sugarcane or sorghum. Again, in Africa, it's really just sorghum, and it's all over, especially Eastern Africa. Preferred crop stage, perhaps greenbug damages any stage, whereas sugarcane aphid maybe does more damage or prefers flowering in later time periods. Perhaps when the plant is changed physiologically and it's taken advantage of that. One thing, we talked about the sugarcane aphid being so devastating, but actually in some ways greenbug is much more damaging. It injects the toxin, it causes a plant to totally react, and sugarcane aphid doesn't do that, although it makes this really nasty sorghum molasses, right? Corn syrup all over. Greenbug started as a cool season pest and then ended up in both wheat and sorghum, whereas sugarcane, what did I just say? Greenbug, and then sugarcane aphid is really a warm season. And then climate, the greenbug essentially prefers it probably more temperate, whereas the sugarcane aphid prefers tropics or subtropics. And some of these are just debatable issues or debatable facts, but this is just what I could gather from what I know. The hosts, you can see the different hosts here. Wheat and sorghum and greenbug, and then some of these other minor favorites, I guess, different cereal grains. Quite a few grasses, lawn grass, forage grass, things like that, and quite a few weeds. Perhaps most any kind of grass the greenbug would infest, except for maize, corn tends to be too large for the little greenbugs. Sugarcane aphid, again, that's not always well known, but sugarcane and sorghum, maize, rice, millet, and then there's panicum and barnyard grass, and probably many other, weedy grasses that the sugarcane aphid might also infest. Okay, this is where I'm going way out on a limb. Let's see if you agree or not. What might be some possible reasons for aphid outbreaks, aphid infestations? Again, from Hooker, Oklahoma, biological warfare? Nope, no Russian aphids, no little green fellows, right? Okay, genetic difference. We know that greenbugs see, probably it wasn't forced change, but it was a different genetics. Different biotype. So far, I don't know that we know that we have any differences in sugarcane aphid, although, they say essentially the base pairs are the same from the ones here versus the ones in Africa. I mean, depends on how close we want to get, maybe, I don't know. A problem with insecticide. As you saw, the greenbug, there's a lot of blame. Greenbugs take over when insecticide is used too much to kill, essentially, it also kills natural enemies. Remember, greenbug biotype D was an insecticide-resistant greenbug. Sugarcane aphids, so far, the great work all of you have been doing, it hasn't caused any problems yet, right? But we need to beware. And again, few natural enemies, save those natural enemies. Grass hosts off-season, out of season. I put off-season because winter, but in Africa it's summer sometimes, so they have opposite seasons or whatever. Greenbug, yeah, takes advantage in those grass hosts they can get, and probably sugarcane aphid does too. So in the off season, you know, we're preparing them for infesting crops if we keep too many grasses. And I think that perhaps one of the main reasons for outbreaks or abundance of them is the weather. Rain or humidity. We know that greenbugs, rain essentially kills greenbugs, knocks them off. But sugarcane aphid, it's actually, I found information that says it prefers 72% humidity. And that's a huge, huge amount of humidity. Favorable temperature, probably. Maybe warmer in the winter for greenbugs and cooler in the summer, so for the sugarcane aphid. Sugarcane aphid lives up to 38 degrees centigrade, whereas we did some work with greenbug and they die out at 30 degrees. We can't keep them living. And I think perhaps wind might be the most common reason for spreading the greenbugs and the sugarcane aphids all over everywhere. So I would recommend relying on IPM, using resistant sorghums, conserving all the natural enemies we can, again, using insecticide judiciously and when needed, and then managing the overwintering hosts, the other grass hosts. And this is a sorghum production field, and with that we can have questions on greenbugs or sugarcane aphid on the bottom.